We are here to talk about something that is very tiny, but is creating a huge problem for the ocean and really for the entire planet. From streams to rivers to lakes to oceans, plastics, and as they break down into microplastics, are a human made hazard that's impacting ocean health, including the food that we are eating all around the world. But thankfully, there's a lot of work going on by the scientific and the conservation communities to pinpoint where ocean plastics and microplastics are coming from, where they are going, and how we can better understand their impacts so that we can take action to solve this very, very serious problem. So now I would like to introduce to you our panelists from NOAA. I'm so pleased to introduce Dr. Jennifer Webster. She is a research oceanographer and data manager at the NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information, also known as the NCEI. And she is based in Mississippi at the Stennis Space Center. Also at the Stennis Space Center is Dr. Ebenezer Najiro, and he is an associate research professor of satellite and physical oceanography at Mississippi State University, and also an affiliate with NOAA NCEI, where he manages NCEI's microplastics product that we're going to be hearing about in our conversation. So let's get to our first question for my great colleagues here. I've mentioned where quite a bit in my introduction. So I'd like to know from each of you colleagues, why is where, especially the science of where, so important to a conversation about ocean microplastic? Jennifer, what say you?
Thank you, Dawn. All right, where? It's sort of the first question you need to have an answer to before you understand how it impacts the ecosystem, how it impacts the marine environment, how it impacts humans. You need to know where it is first. So that's why where is so important. Now, we recognize that the microplastic problem was getting to be more visible in world conversations about environmental health. So in 2020, our colleagues at Mississippi State worked with us to begin collating these data and finding out how much researchers have really looked for microplastics in the marine environment. We started out, we had like 3 data sets. And we put those data sets into an ArcGIS online database and started looking at where the distribution was. Well, those 3 data sets with a couple hundred data points have now ballooned into over 14,000 data points. And it's growing. And this is just surface floating microplastics that researchers and citizen scientists have collected and measured concentrations of around the world. So getting to understand exactly why these impacts are important, you need to know where they are first. And this work that we're doing with the Northern Gulf Institute is kind of the first step.
Oh, fantastic. So we need to hear from Eben now about some of that work more specifically, especially Eben, as you are bridging academia and government with bringing Mississippi State into this wonderful collaboration.
Thanks, Don. So by knowing where the microplastics are, we'll be able to tell the hotspots of microplastics pollution. And knowing the hotspots will help us to have targeted efforts at getting rid of them. As we know, resources are very hard to come by, so you need to know where they are to be able to target your efforts. And knowing where they are also help us to do what we call change detection. Over a period of time, we want to see whether the policies that we are putting in place are helping or not. So through my institution, the Northern Gulf Institute at Mississippi State University and NOAA, we're putting this map together to help us to track where microplastics are and where they're possibly going. Thank you.
This question of where is really quite serious, I'll say, because in my own experience, I was able to reach the deepest part of the entire ocean, Challenger Deep. I did this last summer with Caladan Oceanic, and we dove in a submersible to 10,904 to 10,919 meters. And what we saw down there were these little amphipods, and we were pretty sure that they were Erythenes plasticus. This species was recently discovered and so named because when these creatures were dissected, they found human-made microplastics in their tissues. So these creatures live in the deepest parts of our ocean, and they are a testament to how the problem of microplastic extends literally everywhere. So the work that both Dr. Webster and Dr. Najiro and your colleagues are doing is critically important. And we'd like to hear a bit more about what is next in terms of the research, the critical microplastics research that both of you are doing. So Jennifer, let's start with you, especially in terms of remote sensing.
Yeah. So remote sensing. So the ability to measure things like plastic from space would be really helpful in getting an understanding of where these microplastics are or where plastics are. Unfortunately, they haven't figured out yet how to measure microplastics. However, there are satellites out there that can measure larger pieces of plastic. I think it's Sentinel-2, which is a European satellite. There's some papers that have been published on how they've been able to use Sentinel-2 data to measure larger pieces of plastic in the open ocean. But I do know that they're working on trying to get microplastic measurements. Actually, Eben, we were talking about that the other day. I think you were sharing with me some information about that. You remind me?
Certainly, Jen, that is true. And one of the things we want to do is to extend this study further. Currently, the data that we have in the NOAA NCEI microplastic database are in situ measured. So you have scientists going out on the boat, they collect their samples, and then they bring it to the lab, they examine it. There's only so much that you can do. And we also know some areas are also hard to go to because of weather and then pirate activities. So the development of remote sensing technology will be a big game changer. The advantages is that we'll be able to measure microplastics from space over a large area over a repeated time. That way we're able to track it over time and see whether we're making progress or not. And as Don also mentioned in the introduction, microplastics are everywhere. And it comes from one place to the other, you need to be able to track it. So scientists currently are looking at the technology that will help them to do this. And as Jen mentioned, this is not done yet, but we can look at it at macro. And what scientists are doing now is looking at it in the lab where you want to look at spectral signatures. So spectral signatures are like fingerprints of jet up unique spectral signatures. And we're trying to study the spectral signatures of microplastics. That way, when the satellites fly over water, we'll be able to distinguish microplastics from other debris or just organic matter that in the water. So scientists are seeing that they can sense this using the near-infrared spectra of remote sensing. So you're talking about 800 to about 2,500 nanometers. So that is where the science is going now, and we hope that in the near future, this will reach a space where we'll be able to have expansive microplastic data, be able to put it on Esri's ArcGIS and help us to look at the where and be able to track them.
This is absolutely mind-blowing. It's so exciting. It's so hopeful. And I really love how you emphasized also, both of you, not only space, but time. The time series that's going to be critical for this because of how dynamic the ocean is. And spatial temporal data and analyses are what really hits at the core of how GIS can be helpful to this problem. So I'm guessing that you're working on some new GIS layers now that will be added to the microplastics map. How is that going?
Yeah, actually, Dawn, our GIS team right now is working on putting together additional layers on our GIS site for microplastics that have been measured in the subsurface. Like all the data that we have out there is just floating microplastics. But we have data from subsurface points in the ocean. We also have acquired data in sediments, at bottom sediments of the ocean. And thanks to citizen scientists, we also have data from beaches and ideas on how many microplastics are found on beaches. We'll be adding those layers to our website in the coming months.
That is awesome. And we are going to get the link to the website added to the chat for our audience here. But let's give our audience some time to participate now. So if there are questions and answers, questions, and we will, my guest here will supply the answers that have been entered into the chat. Let's see if we can get to some of those. So we do have one question here. What is the comprehensive definition of microplastics? And are there examples of a map of microplastics in the ocean? So I'll let Eben and Jennifer have at it.
Sure. Well, first I can tell you the science microplastics are defined as plastic pieces that are less than 5 millimeters. That's pretty small. That's like the size of like a pencil tip eraser, like 0.2 of an inch. That's the size of a microplastic. And examples of microplastics on a map, well, that's our website. And that's where we can see where all the microplastics have been found.
Yes, that's great. Eben, anything you'd like to add to that? In fact, Eben, how can you add to that by answering one of the other questions, which is how do you translate the data from a satellite or even from the field to a map like that?
Yeah, interesting question, Dawn. And I should say at present, the NOAA NCI microplastic map is the only one that is we have. The Europeans also have one, but it's more geared towards macroplastics. So that is what is existing now. Scientists are able to get this data by going out to the field, collecting water, and then filtering it. And then also, if they want to look at the animals, they get the animals, bring them into the lab. Or as you are seeing on the image, you have these liter gators that are collecting the data. When they bring it into the lab, they look at it under microscopes, and the ones that are suspected to be microplastics are further confirmed using spectroscopy. And then once they do that, they take measurements of the plastics to know the size. So as Jen mentioned, it should be 5 millimeters or less. And then they look at the color also, and then they look at the type of microplastic. Is it from PVC or other sources? All these help us to be able to properly tell where the microplastics are coming from. Are they from cosmetic materials, facial materials, or everyday water bottles that we use? That is information that we get, and we put most of this in our map.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And young people who are looking for thesis topics or looking for a way forward in your careers, this is a very exciting, very compelling, very necessary science. So we hope that you will look into this much, much more in detail. And a lot of this you can get from the NOAA NCEI map that we've been talking about. It's a web map. It is full of free and open data. That is part of this. That's really important part of this open science that's going on. So I want to just really, really thank Dr. Jennifer Webster and Dr. Eben Najiro. This was a wonderful, wonderful conversation with both of you. And thank you so much for joining us